to take it back a little bit, just after the end of the Cold War, Clinton's driven by finance capital. And it's interesting how the sort of unraveling of the Warsaw Pact and so on plays itself out. He offers a peace agreement to some of the countries in the former Eastern Bloc, and there's a kind of stepping stone approach towards integration. I mean, of course, then Bush comes to power with the sort of neoconservative project, deeply rooted in the military-industrial complex. And you see a hastening of the kind of expansion of NATO and so on. And I think those kinds of interests play themselves out in different ways. I just want to go back to the point that Walden made about demilitarizing sort of the South China Sea and kind of bring it back to the Ukraine situation right now. I think one of the factors and conditions feeding into what we're dealing with in sort of Europe today is the failure of the European project and the pan-European project, and its failure to actually embrace, if you like, Eastern Europe and consolidate that. And I think that's also sort of a factor that's playing itself out here. And I think that in that context, it is interesting for us to talk about, well, what are the ways forward in the light of what's happening in Ukraine? I mean, is it about a renewed pan-European inclusive project? Is it about a denuclearized zone between Western Europe and Russia? Is it about neutral countries? So I'll just leave it there, because I think these are some of the issues we have to grapple with if we want a kind of principled politics of peace.
On Ukraine, yes, the Clinton period really is being revisited critically now, because that's in fact, with the collapse of the old Soviet Union, the whole aggressive push of NATO eastward really began in that period, and the more the Russia was weakened by the whole set of neoliberal measures under Boris Yeltsin, the more aggressive NATO became, bringing in one Eastern European country after the other, and basically, you now have a situation where parts of the old Soviet Union, and not just the old Soviet bloc, but parts of the old Soviet Union, in the Baltic region, have all now been integrated into NATO. And so I think what the question we asked then is, why did Putin make this extremely aggressive step? And I think it comes at the end of a long process in which there was a big fear in the Kremlin that it had basically lost control of its borders or borderlands. And it was just a matter of time before NATO, before Ukraine would join NATO. And I think with all the big fears about, US nuclear capabilities, missiles being just deployed along the Russian border in the same way that Kennedy worried about Soviet missiles being deployed just 95 miles away in Cuba back in the 1960s. So my sense is it's this combination of strategic fears, the big Russian minority in the border sections of the Ukraine, where you do have a very strong presence of Russian language speaking people. And then this old notion that, hey, we have to have some sort of neutral area separating the West from the Soviet Union, from Russia. So I think it's all of those things coming together that I think, plus, of course, and I think this is what you wanted to emphasize when you say it's more complex than that. But there is, in fact, also Putin's project of restoring the Russia as a great power, and that's also there. So it's my sense is that that's the whole mix that comes in to create this situation right now. My 10 cents worth, not being an expert on Eastern Europe or Ukraine.
So I think there is some difference in how we think about this. If we think about the U.S. situation as being absolute decline or relative decline, or the relative emergence or catch up. And I think what your essay illustrates, Walden, is especially the end of the capacity for the U.S. to act simply unilaterally, even if it's still preeminent. And we're kind of in this place of kind of an unequal balance of forces without anything being able to be created new, in a sense. Both in some senses struggling to kind of find a way to restabilize the world economy and geopolitical relations at this point in time, with neoliberalism being very, very long in the tooth. I think the U.S., this has given the U.S. still a great capacity to block a lot of things. Which you could see particularly at the COP meetings. They can block, but they aren't able fully to create anything new. But they have maintained, particularly in military matters, a lot of longer term strategic capacities. Yes. And ability to build alliances over the longer term. The Quad example is one thing, but the positioning of the American military bases scattered throughout the world, but particularly through in the China Sea, is an impact of this. And I think even the intervention in the Ukraine is not something that wasn't, or those politics are something that's, our long-term and strategic build-up, from the color revolutions to, this kind of steady kind of building up of those alternative capacities in the Ukraine. And, with not being able to move NATO into that position immediately at all, to kind of incrementally kind of arm, indirectly put NATO's presence there through trainers and the amount of billions of dollars that they put into the Ukraine over a long time period. In a sense, in realist politics, all those measures with a country that's been attacked from the West several times since the mid-19th century. It's a kind of a constant poking in the eye, with the endless tally that's there of 30 million killed by those Western interventions. And most states will react in that context. And the U.S. has kind of just constantly, through NATO, been poking it in the eye and building up those capacities, from kind of alternative political forces with its willingness to work with the hard right in the Ukraine, to the remilitarization, and steadily bringing in a range of its main allies, first Canada and the UK, to kind of be engaged with those training things there in the Ukraine.
I think Vishwas was ready to jump in.
Yeah. I'll turn it back. And so I think that's been crucial. But I think the other thing that the long-term strategy here is also about keeping Germany in position in a way that it's not able to consolidate an alternative Europe that would kind of extend to Russia and keep it in this Western alliance as a major force. And you've had the SPD through Schroeder and others kind of edging towards that orientation and kind of putting that blockage in place. And what the politics now is pushing Germany back into that alliance with the Americans, and it's a way to block any kind of different relationship from China through Russia to Europe. And that's kind of been the objective for a long time, to prevent that. So it's kind of a way that you kind of maintain this unequal equilibrium at the center of the world economy without an alternative multipolar order emerge. And there's a real long-term thinking, strategic thinking there. And similar, there's some of that also, I think, around around financial issues and the management of the banking structures as well that one can't forget. So I think, that's why we can kind of continue with this polarization without being able to find new routes out. And the dangers, as you eloquently put it, is particularly the American capacity to act and to viciously act, given the historical background and history of American militarism.
You're almost, sorry, Greg, you're almost making it sound like Putin is a puppet of the US and its long-term strategic.
I think he's indirectly reacting and trying to figure out how to react in this space when you're getting poked in the eye, and what is the basis to act, and and then
I just want to make two quick points building on what Greg said. I mean, when Biden declared, trickle-down economics hasn't worked, and you have two kind of big projects being sort of railroaded through the U.S. Congress. You really thought that this was a sort of 1945 moment, where the U.S. and Biden was going to sort of remake not just domestic politics, but global politics. And that really hasn't happened. I mean, in a sense, he's chosen a sort of reactive liberal imperialism, and we've seen the continuities with the Trump project and so on. And in that context, actually killing the globalizing project, in my view. The neoliberal class project is in crisis. But at the same time, it's clear that U.S. imperialism, Greg, in my view, as well as whatever China has to offer, or Russia, doesn't have solutions to the deeper systemic crises of capitalism today, the deeper contradictions that are eating up the system. And so we are in a transition, in a very complex transition, in which this whole situation can move further and further to the right, sort of more fascism, eco-fascism, and a world of chaos, which brings forth very serious challenges to the left. I mean, what is our requisite and proportionate response to this? What do we have to offer? Thanks.
Just quickly, that's why I think it's a really negative equilibrium now in this kind of preeminence, and China being able to rival it. And the U.S., also has the advantage, somewhat like the authoritarian structures in China, but also its own form of kind of limited or post-democracy, is you have a working class that's extremely weak, and you have no political challenges in the U.S. that is able to kind of push an alternative agenda. So I agree kind of your assessment exactly. We end up in this unstable position where nobody can create anything new, either in a positive basis, and even the negative is largely that. So the U.S. can kind of devise a strategy that'll block a different kind of entente. It's the U.S. that messed up anything of going forward on the Minsk Accord. If they put pressure on the Ukraine to follow on the Minsk Accord, which the Russians had signaled on many times that they would accept, things are totally different. Obviously, they're blocking it constantly and putting pressure on the Ukrainian government, particularly in the coup engineered in 2014, 2015.